So back in 1998, I was an army chef serving in Antrim, Northern Ireland. Among the soldiers on camp, we had a visiting cadre of military policemen, about 15 of them. Being a chef, as you can imagine, you get to meet pretty much everyone. So over the days of their visits, I got pretty friendly with them. As they were temporarily based at our barracks, they were housed in the Tenko huts, as we called them. Basically, old wooden huts, I think 10 or 12 in what was one long room, with bed spaces either side. One evening, I went to the camp which had a small convenience store and bar for soldiers, and joined the queue with about 6 of the policemen. That was when I noticed one of the guys looked rough, like ashen pale with big dark bags under his eyes. His mates were all taking the piss out of him. Curious, I asked him what was wrong, and what he said next has always stuck with me. He explained, in the early hours of morning, he was woken by the sounds of someone walking into the room. He said he lay in bed listening to the footsteps, but as his locker blocked the view, he couldn't see who it was. The footsteps slowly carried on walking down the room towards his bed space, until finally he saw that the footsteps belonged to an old man. He was bald, but with grey hair at the sides, wearing a red and blue lumberjack bomber jacket, and he was walking with his mouth wide open. He said the old man walked to the end of his bed, and then turned towards him. That's when he noticed that his hands had fingers that were unnaturally long, like a foot in length. He said the man reached out with both hands as if to grab him. He tried to move, but said he was literally paralyzed and couldn't move a muscle. While he was telling me the story, his mates were all laughing. Apparently, he had woken them all up by screaming. But it was when he described the old man's hair that stood up on my body, even recalling this now. The thing is, I recognized the man from his description. One of the civilians who washed the pots and pans in the kitchens was a grumpy old man from Liverpool. A few months prior, he had sadly collapsed walking home just outside camp and had died of a heart attack. He always wore a red and blue lumberback padded jacket, and when they tried to resuscitate him, they discovered he had stolen a big block of cheddar from the kitchens. It always struck with me. He was a cantankerous old git, but harmless. I hate the thought of him somehow stuck in limbo there, but maybe it was just a coincidence and was a vivid nightmare. What do you think? I've been a firefighter for about 9 years now in Northwest Virginia. I've often heard stories about fire stations being haunted, and I've even had some strange experiences myself at my own station and in a few incidents. My favourite example of something I can't explain is a scene of a fatal hit and run involving a pedestrian. It happened in December of 2016. My department was responding to a chimney fire when we were toned again for a vehicle versus pedestrian. We were on scene of the fire and had to put the next due engine on the vehicle versus pedestrian call. About an hour later, around 10:30, after we finished cleaning our equipment from the fire, we were dispatched to assist the Virginia State Police with their investigation by providing light to their scene. When we arrived on scene, we noticed that there was police tape everywhere. I got out of the engine and illuminated the scene to find a black sheet obviously covering a body. There were 11 police officers walking around, some behind the tape talking to potential witnesses, and others walking around inside the tape gathering items to start their investigation. Among the officers inside the tape, I noticed a Caucasian lady who was about 5'4" and was wearing dark blue jeans, a white shirt with thick brown stripes and a greenish coat. She looked concerned and very out of place, but she was near some of the officers, so I thought, obviously, she had permission to be there. I turned around to start recirculating the tank water due to the extreme cold, and got back in the engine shortly after. Occasionally, I'd look up from my phone to see what the officers were doing for their investigation, and then swiftly look back at my phone. After about 10 minutes or so, I got out to recirculate the pump again. Just as I got out of the engine, an officer uncovered the body. The body was of a Caucasian woman. She was wearing dark blue jeans, a white top, with thick brown stripes and a greenish coat. I instantly realized that she was wearing the same clothes as the lady I had previously seen walking around the body. I stood there frozen and tried to analyze what I was seeing for what felt like a minute. I composed myself and scanned the rest of the scene in an attempt to spot the lady wearing the same clothes and walking around. After a few frigid minutes of looking, I got back in the engine and waited until the investigation was finished. I couldn't find a way to tell the other person in the engine without sounding crazy, so I kept it to myself. I really wish I could find a logical way to explain this, because it still gives me chills when I think about it. The concerned look on the woman's face is something that will never leave my mind. I have a physics degree, and I'm very skeptical of stuff to begin with, but I've always been extremely fascinated by this stuff. Had some experiences with a Ouija board when I was aged 14 to 20, but still nothing to make me 100% believe. Backstory. I've been to this hotel 6 times. 2 of the times, we've had some interesting stuff happen. The other 4 times, we've caught absolutely nothing. The first time there, we caught very little in the way of evidence of ghost hunting. But about 10 minutes after we arrived, my wife thought a kid tugged on her shirt in the kitchen as we were mingling with other guests. She mentioned it, but chalked it up to not much of anything. Later that night, when we went to bed, I would have sworn to you a small dog or a cat jumped in bed with us. It happened 3 times. The first 2 times, I thought it was just my imagination, all the way to the blankets. But when I pulled the blanket tight between my feet and the pressure sat down between my feet, I then got up and walked around the room and went to the bathroom. Anyway, I'm still not convinced. Now fast forward to a year later. We're in the green hallway, and the room is absolutely popping off with sounds and whistles. In the video, you can hear 3 instances of the whistles that we heard with our ears in the moment. And the last one, no one heard, but it showed up on the recorder after the fact. When it happened, and especially the extremely loud and clear one, I was convinced someone was faking it or messing with us. Even afterwards, I still didn't believe it. But ironically, only 3 of us in a group of 10 heard the extremely loud and clear whistle. It wasn't until later that night, when the guest who I was sure played a recording, came up to me and told me he caught the whistle on his recorder, that I kinda thought maybe we had caught something strange. When he played it back to me, he was even louder and more clear this time, but still was clearly not coming from him, because in my recording, you can hear my whistle and how loud and obvious it is that it's a real person. Three days ago, I was out fishing. I started fishing around 4 in the afternoon that day, from shore, and probably about 9:30 p.m, I decided I was going to move spots, because I wanted to try for catfish along the channel. I drive to a new spot while talking on the phone to my friend. This fishing spot is pretty regularly used by people, and is an unofficial boat launch, and within view of my childhood home where my mom still lives. The spot isn't lit up except by a streetlight about 1.5 blocks away. As I'm pulling up, my headlights shine on the dark shape of a person right by the water. I pause, because I don't want to fish next to a stranger in the dark in the middle of nowhere. But when I look again, the shape wasn't there, so I figured it was my eyes as I was driving in. I get off the phone with my friend and get myself set up by the shore, essentially where I thought I had seen the person standing, because that was the best spot to get set up with my chair. I sat alone in the dark for about an hour or so, and at one point, I turned on my flashlight to toss my hat in a different spot. It's a cloudless night, so I can see stars, but there isn't a moon at all, so it's really quite dark. The one streetlight comes nowhere close to illuminating the spot. Nowhere close to it, actually. I have my flashlight on and get myself seated back in my chair before turning it back off. I sit there in the dark for a few minutes as my eyes adjust again, when I realise that directly across the channel, about 20 feet, I can see my shadow in my camping chair, and about 6 feet to the right of my shadow, I see another shadow shaped like a person facing me. Thinking that maybe it's just some really dark, conveniently shaped foliage across the water, I turn my light on only to see nothing. The grasses are the same, no bushes. I turn my light back off and see it's still there. I move around a bit with the light off to confirm my shadow hasn't doubled from some other unseen light source, and I see my shadow move, but not the other one. I get up, and over the course of 5 minutes, I move around, turning my light on and off, around the shore from behind my chair, around the sides, behind my car, which was parked about 50 feet from shore, and couldn't make that extra shadow change position or shape. I decided that I'm going to sit back down and ignore it, because I don't have time for foolishness sometimes. I sit down in my chair and turn off the light and realize that now the shadow has moved closer by about 3 feet and changed shape to be more identifiable as a person, but turned to the side of it as standing next to me and looking at me. It was at that point I decided that I wasn't turning the light off, and it was time to go home. I was 18 at the time. Summer, in the middle of the night, about 1 a.m. I lived in a 3-story house, which is still somewhat in construction to this day, with my family, our room being on the 2nd floor. Our housekeeper also slept in this one makeshift bedroom for her, near the stairs up to the 3rd floor, where she could see everything by the entrance to the house. Most of the time, she calls off the dogs we had if they were being too rowdy downstairs. Sometimes she'd go down there herself at the late hours when needed. Anyways, the stairs leading down were on the opposite side to where she slept at the time. And if you would go outside our bedroom door, the stairs would be on the left side, while our housekeeper would be on the right. Our internet modem was placed outside our room, a straight shot forward from our bedroom door. And at night, I made it a habit to turn it off. Both me and my brother shared the room and tended to sleep really late, so we would end up being the last couple to be awake in the house. I volunteered to go outside and turn off the modem. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, turning on the lights in the process to see where I was going. Everything seemed fine. The dogs were pretty quiet. I could see our housekeeper sleeping comfortably in a bed. Other than the sounds of random cars passing by outside, it was completely silent. I made it to the modem and shut the thing off. And right before I turned around, I could hear a faint but audible shh. I don't know why, but something inside me told me that it wasn't our housekeeper. Not only did the sound come from my left, where the stairs leading down would be, but it just didn't sound right. It wasn't the kind of shh meant to silence someone. More like a person calling out to you to get your attention, to make you look to whoever or whatever had made the call. Needless to say, I didn't look. I turned around and sprinted for the door to our bedroom. The looming sense of dread somehow built up so much in me, even though the door was only 4 or 5 steps away. Once I got in, my brother asked me if I was okay. I told him about all of it in a joking and obnoxious manner, but in reality, I was scared. Nothing else happened after that. I find it ironic, honestly. My folks have a long history of hauntings, especially my mother. But this was my first and currently only real-life spook that has happened to me. I don't know if I should be relieved or disappointed, but either way, I definitely do not want to get the shh at me anytime soon. When I was 18 years old, summer of 2009, me and a friend decided to visit a cemetery in our area at night. It was connected to a park with a trail and woods behind it. The cemetery was old, like the early 1800s. My friend and I drove up to the trail parking lot. We got out of his car and walked down the dark lanes surrounded by dark trees and shadow. As we were walking closer to the cemetery, I started getting nervous for some reason. We got to the cemetery in the middle of the woods, and I started getting this bad feeling like we were being watched. We kept getting closer to the back of the cemetery. Once we were in the middle of the cemetery, I noticed orbs of light in the woodland towards the back of the cemetery. There were at least 50 plus orbs. Too many to count, really. We got closer and they got brighter. The feeling in my stomach got worse. I stopped and whispered to my friend if he was seeing the same thing. He confirmed the same thing. We inched a little closer toward the back of the cemetery, and I got this terrible feeling inside of me. Like it was evil and that I should not get closer to the orbs. I said that I think we should go back. He agreed, and I just knew it was something we should stay away from. So we started walking back quietly. We made it to the back of the dark grass lane in the woods, which led to the parking lot in the middle of nowhere. As we were walking about halfway down the lane, I heard a twig snap. I thought it was just an animal, so I kept going at my normal pace. All of a sudden, we heard a crash in the woods, followed by footsteps that quickened in pace, running towards us. So we started sprinting down the lane to my friend's car in the parking lot. We got to the opening, and we practically dove into his car. He's starting his car up, and I see a hooded figure with a large knife in his hand, reflecting moonlight off of it. He stopped at the edge of the woods staring at us. My friend sped out of there as fast as he could. Later, one of my other friends I worked with was leaving a company kickball league match at another park about 15 minutes away in the same county. It was also at night, and he ended up talking to another one of his friends after the game. They ended up being the last two people still at the park. My friend said he saw a man in a dark hood standing underneath a massive old footbridge that was on the east end of the park, approximately 200 meters from him. It was no longer in service, and it was falling apart with signs around it warning of falling debris. He started running at the two guys, and my friend noticed he had a knife. He told his friend. They both sprinted to their cars and got out of there. Apparently, the hooded man got really close to my friend's car and hit it with his hands before he could get away. My friends said they went back to the park and they found a dead cat underneath the bridge. It might have been hanging, laying there with its throat slashed, but I can't recall the details. I also learned of the individual's name that was chasing us, and he had gone to the same high school as me, but was several years older. Apparently, he was in a demonic cult. I had heard from numerous other people say there was a local cult with the same description. They were meeting in abandoned factories, warehouses, buildings, and secluded places around the area of the county I lived in. I was also told that they would find dead cats and other animals at these other locations, which seems to be demonic, but I'm no expert on this topic. Regardless, what's your opinion on what this cult group was doing? And what do you think of the orbs of light near the cemetery where the cult was meeting? I honestly have never seen anything like this in my life. I did research, and there were a few places that said the orbs of light could represent spirits or demonic spirit portals. I honestly have no idea, other than they were evil spirits, and that I should not get any closer to them. Back in 2009, I was 26 years old and I lived by myself on the second floor of a multi-family house. The entrance door to the apartment was a double door made of clear glass that led straight to the living room, so someone standing at the door would pretty much see the whole layout of the house, since it was a studio-like place where the living room and kitchen was in an open concept. and you could see the door, a real wood one that led to my room. It was really weird at first, but it grew on me, and I ended up liking it. To ensure privacy, I installed heavy curtains on the inside of it, but I would always leave them open during the day because it would help with the lighting. I never had issues with it, at least not with the living, throughout the whole time I lived there. But one day, something really creepy happened. Something I never wrapped my mind around up to this day. That day, me and my boyfriend at the time had just started dating and were going to go to the movies. So he called me and told me what time he would pick me up, so I headed to the shower. The bathroom was inside my bedroom to get ready. I left my bedroom door open because even though the curtains from the main entrance were open, you couldn't see inside the bedroom, just its door. So I showered and started getting dressed when I suddenly realized the time he said he would stop by came and went. I thought he was just a little late, so I called him to see if he was on the way. When he answered, I asked him if he was coming, and he was super confused. He said he had gone to pick me up, but when he got to the door, he saw I had a visitor, so he left and was going to give me a call later. I told him no one had been at the house, and I ran to check the doors and the front locks, and asked if he'd come over to the house again. Everything was locked. Windows, front door, everything. When he got there, his face was white as paper, and he was black, and he proceeded to tell me what he saw. He said that when he got to the front glass door, my curtains were opened as usual, and he saw a black man dressed in light jeans and a white buttoned shirt in my living room. The man was right in front of the bedroom's door, which was opened like I mentioned, and he was looking towards it, talking and laughing like he was having a conversation with me. My boyfriend was a little confused, so he kind of stood there for a few seconds when the man acknowledged him, looked at him, and then looked away again, returning to his conversation with me, again in a friendly manner. So my boyfriend just left. This happened right during the time I was getting dressed in my bedroom. I was terrified, and up to this day, I'm puzzled, and it still gives me creeps. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, around 2005, I lived in a house with my mom. I don't have any brothers or sisters, so I always wanted one to play, because I felt lonely sometimes. So I remember that some days I used to play in between a wall and the door of my bedroom with a little girl. I always thought that it was my imaginary friend, because I would often hear about them in movies and TV shows. I remember my mom asking about my imaginary friend, and I told her that she had her face covered in some sort of mud or dirt, and that I could only see her eyes. I told my mom that she was my neighbour, but that she had fallen in the streets, and that's why her face was like that. I still remember her face so vividly to this day. I remember that some days my mum used to have people with her in our house, and they would often stay in the living room talking about stuff. My mum always told me to stay in her bedroom until they were gone. Some other strange things that happened in that time period was that my mom often would visit the grave of a friend of hers that had recently passed away at that time, and she would often cry a lot at his grave, saying things like, "Take me with you, I can't do this anymore," and stuff like that. I never thought about it because I was so little and I didn't understand much about what was going on at the time. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, about 2016. My mum was getting married and the photographer of the wedding was a friend of hers. I'm going to call the photographer Laura. So before the photo session, we went to Laura's house and they started talking about random stuff, and then something pops out of me. Laura asked my mom if our house was still haunted. Something clicked with me and I started asking questions to both my mom and Laura. Laura told me that one time she went to our house, but there was nobody there, and because of that, she wrote something in a post-it note and stuck it on our front door. But when she was doing so, she saw the curtain started to move as if someone had sticked his head out to look outside. She found that quite strange and asked my mom about it, and my mom told her the story about what was going on. I started questioning my mom about what happened at that time, and she told me the whole story. My mom's side of the story. Apparently, in 2004 and 2005, my mom used to work in the same place with a neighbour. A girl about the same age as my mom. I'm gonna call her Abigail. They were never friends, but they got along fine. Abigail's mom used to sell paintings, and my mom asked to buy one that had a couple of angels and a Bible verse. It's worth mentioning that I don't remember this painting at all. So when my mom got the painting, strange stuff started happening in our home. She would often see a woman and a little girl. She always was in a bad mood, and sometimes our house would start to freeze in some rooms. So my mom started looking for help and called a church group to pray in our home. But she didn't see any improvement in the situation, so she and my grandma went to see some sort of medium or witch. I really don't know what this lady was. My mom started talking about what was happening in our house at the time, that she would often be in a bad mood, that she would often visit her friend's grave and cry for help. The medium told my mom that when she went to visit her friend's grave, she wasn't asking for her to a friend, that she was speaking to something or someone else. Then the medium said that our house had some spirits that came from something inside our home. She asked if my mom was given some present or if she bought something when everything started to happen, and if she knew someone that could be jealous about my mom's life. My mom told her about the story of the painting and Abigail, and the medium told her to burn the painting because it could be what was causing everything. So my mom called her brothers and tried to burn the painting, but it didn't catch fire at all. My mom went back to the medium some days later, and the medium helped her burn the painting. But the medium told my mom that she had to make sure that nothing wrong happened to Abigail, because every bad thing that the painting had would come back to Abigail. But if something happened to Abigail, my mom would keep the bad stuff on her. After that, everything went back to normal. We moved cities and started using that house as a storage unit to keep our old furniture and boxes there. But one day, I went back to my old city to visit some family, and I was staying at my grandparents' house. But there was a thunderstorm that cut the entire block's electricity, so we had the idea to go to my childhood home and stay there for the night. We went to my old house and tried to unlock the front door with no success. I tried unlocking the back door with no success either, and my grandma told me to leave, that the house didn't want us there that night. Through my younger years, my mother dated a guy very on and off, which I think mostly had to do with him being in the army and staying with his family in Laredo, Texas, whenever he was home. Either way, he invited us to visit his cousin's summer cabin in Monterrey, Mexico for a weekend, so we did. The cabin was very ranch style, longer in one dimension and shorter than the other, so it was built like an architectural rectangle. On one far side of the building was the kitchen, and next to it was the living room. Attached to the living room was a long, slender hallway connected to the bedrooms on each side, and a bathroom on one of the sides. The backyard was only accessible through the living room via a sliding door, and what started as a bit of the desert floor met a forest tree line of dead and dying Monterey cypress trees. Meeting the tree line was an elevated hunting tower which had its platform meeting the top of the vertical tree line. On our way to the cabin, my mom's boyfriend was telling us about a cursed legend of the witches of Monterey. Apparently, they had been haunting the mountains area for generations and were his childhood version of La Llorona. Clearly, he was trying to scare us from the get-go, and me being so young, I was eating this shit up like candy. We got to the cabin in the late evening, so we decided to stay in for the night and watch M. Night Shyamalan's The Lady in the Water. After the movie, my mom's boyfriend asked me to go get something from the bedroom for him. And as I was halfway down the hallway, he turned the lights off on me. Let me remind you This was a very rural part of Mexico, so the dark was dark. So, with all the scary stories and the scary movie, I was spooked and froze. My mom's boyfriend began to make his stereotypical ghost noises and taunted me to go deeper into the dark hallway. But I was so petrified, I remember just standing there frozen in fear. Long story short, my mother got onto him and he turned the lights back on. They comforted me, and after a few apologies, we all went to bed. I can't remember how I slept that night, but I honestly wish I did. The next day, we did basic tourist shit. Went to a bazaar, embraced the city's beautiful mountain range which seemed to hug the city, ate authentic Mexican food, and visited the main hub of the city. When the day was all done, we decided to call it and went back to the cabin. This is important to me because I remember the night before so vividly, yet can't remember anything else about this night other than what I'm going to write about. I was in the living room of the cabin and remember my mom's boyfriend was there with me. He asked if I wanted to go up into the hunting tower out back with him, and innocently I said yes. I remember following him through the back door of the living room, and I remember him walking ahead and turning back to wave me towards him. I took it as he was trying to help me keep up with him and follow him. I watched him climb up to the ladder of the hunting tower, and then I heard a voice behind me. "Hey, where are you going?" It was my mom's boyfriend behind me, asking where I was going. I turned back around to look at the hunting tower along the tree line, and no one was there. Nothing was. Not an animal, not my mother, not a spectre. Nothing. Fast forward to a few years ago. My now wife and I were still dating at the time, and sharing ghost experiences with one another. And yes, I do have one other ghost experience in my life that I believe to be genuine as well. I told her about this experience in Monterey, and I'll never forget the pale look on her face when I told her. She is from a Mexican family as well, and this legend of the witches of Monterey is a very real thing for her as well. The scary part? I was telling her this story on a Friday, and according to what her family told her growing up, Friday is a forbidden day to talk about them because that's the one day of the week they're most powerful. Apparently, they never forget their prey and use that day as a lure towards what was lost. Initially, I thought bullshit, but I can't begin to express how many Fridays my wife had to stop me because I had randomly brought the story up on a Friday. Maybe it was self-conscious. I don't know. I live in rural Appalachia and adore the wilderness. I often invite friends to come out and camp with me. One, because I enjoy sharing the wilderness with people close to me. And two, because there's a creature that lives in my woods, as mentioned. A couple years ago, maybe 4 or 5, my aunt brought a small cabin from the Amish and placed it here. She intended it to be used as a playhouse for my younger cousins, but my cousins never enjoyed it and could never stay a full night here. The weekend off of school came around, and I called out to my friend to see if he'd like to stay in the woods for the weekend. He agreed, and his mom brought him out. We started walking and made it not even halfway to our destination when he asked if we could just stay in the new cabin for a night or two, because the weather said it was going to storm anyways. We walked back to the top of the hill so I could text my aunt and she gave me the okay. It was starting to get dark, so we went ahead and settled down completely in the cabin and started eating what was supposed to be camping rations. We talked and talked for hours until we looked out the window and noticed it was dark out and the rain was coming down. We decided it was best to lay down and go to sleep. He passed out almost instantly, leaving me alone in pitch black darkness, listening to the sound of heavy rain hitting the tin roof. I didn't even realize I fell asleep until I heard loud knocking and rattling on the door, and I figured my buddy went out to pee or something. The door had a large window, and I could clearly see someone standing there. I was dreading having to crawl out of the blankets into the slightly moist, cold, still-aired room to let him in, after he somehow locked himself out. So I rolled over to prepare to stand up, and as I was faced his bed, which I couldn't make out the shape 100%. But as I focused my eyes more, I could see he was still in it. I froze and was in pure terror for what seemed like at least an hour, when I hear the thing at the door make a sound akin to clearing its throat and run into the woods. I waited at least 20 minutes before asking if my friend was awake, and he immediately said, "Yeah." "Did you see and hear that thing too?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Were you awake when it was happening?" "No," he said. We laid there too scared to move or make a sound above a whisper for hours. I would start drifting off and almost immediately start hearing something tap on the windows. But I tried my best to ignore it, even when I could clearly hear something rubbing its fingers on the edge of the tin roof on my side of the cabin. Morning came and I felt like death. My buddy didn't feel as bad and apparently thought the figure was a dream, but he quickly realized it wasn't, the more details I brought up. We packed up and started to make our way back to my house. Halfway up the hill to my house, I realized the scariest part of everything the night had to offer. We never locked the door. The rest of the way up the hill was spent with me constantly looking over my shoulder down at the cabin. To this day, I haven't spent another night in it or gave it a glance longer than 2 seconds on my way to the woods. I've seen a ghost only once. It was so real that I could believe it without effort. There were physical effects to the incident, and I could have no doubt. I decided to work overnight at the club where I'm a maintenance man. I was alone in the place, so it was pretty nice at first. I hijacked the sound system and played my own music while I worked, and for a while, everything was normal. I decided to go check on the boiler in the mezzanine, and this is where the night changed. The mezzanine floor had been problematic since I started about a year and a half prior. The lights would flicker, the pumps ran roughly, and the power from the breaker box would drop off and go back to normal in quick intervals. It never happened so quickly that the pumps never shut off. But when I measured power with my multimeter, I could see it dip and come back up again, causing the display on my meter to fluctuate rapidly. I had called an electrician about the first 6 months on the job, and he had looked over everything in the mezzanine floor. The answer seemed obvious. The breaker box was from the 1960s and was so old that it wasn't working properly. He recommended changing it for a new one. The board of directors scoffed at the price, and so we operated with the old box for another year. This night, I was in the same mezzanine, and the lights were flickering as usual. It got chilly, and the lights began to flicker more rapidly. After about 30 seconds, it began flashing like a strobe light. I stood in the doorway, beginning to feel a little afraid of the light bulbs exploding. I looked at the one closest to me, and then noticed him out of the corner of my eye. I was not alone in the room. There was a man standing in the corner looking at me. I was so scared that I turned very slowly to look at him. In the strobing light, my eyes moved closer to his position, and I was too scared to move them any more quickly. I can see very well in my peripheral vision, well enough to read sometimes. I saw a man in a navy blue shirt and pants, staring at me with his teeth bared. He looked as if he'd been horribly burned, and his eyelids and lips were gone. He was about 5 feet and 7 inches tall. Slowly, still my eyes moved toward him until he rested on the spot he had been standing. But he was gone. I called out into the room, scared and trying to remain brave. "Dude, you're dead," I said. "You're not supposed to be here." The strobe effect of the lights became more intense. Whatever place has been calling to you, that pull you feel, you have to go there. There's nothing left for you here. You're dead, I said. I tried to feel love for the unfortunate soul, and suddenly the flashing stopped. The mezzanine went back to normal, better than I had ever seen it. The lights stopped flickering altogether. The pumps were purring like they had never done before. The power from the breaker box has been consistent ever since. I don't think I need any more proof of the afterlife if that's how it's going to present itself. Once was enough for me. It was 1998 and my mum had bought her first home. Her being a single mom, this was huge. A 4-bed, 1-bathroom house with a family room and a pool in the back. The house was big and had lots of room for me and my brother to play in. My mom said since she was a child, she would see demons, and because of her gift, she was used by her church to point where the spirits were. She said I would see them when I was 4, but I don't remember. My mom just told me I would react to them. I do feel and hear them. Since we moved to this house, I felt a tall, dark figure in front of my bedroom door. He would never dare to come in, but he would walk around the kitchen that was right in front of my room. I never was a person to close my bedroom door because I always felt him there. Because of it, I slept with a nightlight to feel safe. If the light went off, I would feel dread, paralyzed, and would sweat profusely until my mom came to help me or bring a candle. Multiple times, I would take out the courage and tell him to leave, and he did, and I was able to sleep. A lot more weird things happened in the house, and my mom had to talk to a pastor. When the pastor came, he told us the spirits were using our home as a bridge between our neighbors that would summon them and that there was nothing he could do. So we just had to accept we had visitors and learn to live with that. For some months, I felt calm, and some, I felt pure dread staying in my room, and I had to live with that. He was there every night and only left when I told him to. At 21 years of age, I got a new dog. She would sleep with me and she made me feel safer. When I felt him, she would bark at the door. The first time she didn't, I knew I was not crazy and that it was never only in my head. My dog gave me more courage to tell him go away, and he did. So I was able to sleep better than I did as a child. My dog would also bark at the same area even during the day. At 22, I moved out and had my first child. My mom, being awesome, let us stay with her for 3 months to adjust to our new life as new parents and to learn from her. The first night I slept in my mom's room with my son, when my partner slept in my room, where there was only a sofa. Next morning, he was scared and with pure panic in his eyes. He said he heard a noise that woke him up and saw the door of my room open and a tall, dark figure came closer and closer to him. He wasn't able to move or speak. I always told him about the figure in front of my room, but he always brushed it off as me being a paranoid person. That day, he learned I wasn't lying. Years later, my mom sold the house to a lovely couple with a toddler and a baby on the way. But we then heard the news they stopped living in it and then sold it again. Now it's being put up for rent and no one wants it. I always ask my mom if it's because of the spirits that walk around it. Around 2008 to 2009, when I was 13 and 14, I had just started a new habit of staying up very late. I'd sit in my room with the clock radio playing some tunes while I sat in bed doodling all night. I can't pinpoint exactly when it started, but one of those nights, my radio just began making this jacked up noise, like a distorted, terrible noise over the faint sound of music struggling to be heard. I immediately hated it, but changing the station did nothing. This went on for a few minutes and just stopped. I quickly shrugged it off. Then it kept happening. Every night, for a few minutes, the radio would go nuts. If I wasn't being a lazy sack, I'd get up and turn it down for a while. Most nights, regardless of how much it bothered me, I'd usually just suffer through it. It occurred to me that it seemed to always happen around the same time. So curiously, I paid attention one evening. At 3:30 exactly, on this little clock, it started, and it didn't stop until the turn of 3:34. So for a solid 3 minutes this would go on. I was aware there was some sort of significance to 3 a.m., and I wasn't the type of person to believe in that kind of thing, but still, it made me feel really uneasy. It felt so intentional. So I paid attention for more nights, and every single night, 3:30 to 3:34, it happened. I tried telling my family. No one believed me or bothered to listen to my off-putting rants. You know how in horror movies, the adults never listen to the kids, blatantly calling things out? Ever thought that was unrealistic? It isn't. Everyone else in my house was asleep by 3 a.m. until finally one night, my older brother and his best friend were awake long enough for me to convince one of them to please come check this out. He acknowledged the strange sound and literally said, "I'm not fucking with that," and left. I started just turning the radio off and hanging out in the game room, but every time 3:30 rolled around, I was on edge. One night, once again alone, I was sitting at the desktop computer, trolling whatever, when I heard what sounded like an avalanche falling in my kitchen right below me. The game room was upstairs and overlooked the living room, which connected to the kitchen. Completely open space. I heard what I assumed was every pot and pan in our kitchen simultaneously falling out of the cabinets. My first assumption was our cat was up to no good and knocked something over. But as I descended down the stairs in the pitch black abyss of the ground floor, I thought, what if someone's breaking in? I run to switch on the lights, but nothing. No cat, no pants, no mess. Everything's perfectly fine. I was so confused. I even looked around to make sure, but I had zero explanation. And I know for a fact the kitchen was the source of this noise. The last minor thing I can recall was an incident where I was on the phone with my best friend, and mid-call, the phone went absolutely nuts. The call cut out and just screeched and gargled. I can't quite describe it, but I've never stared at something in pure terror like that before. It was a landline, and it's not like something similar hasn't occurred before, but this was different. Just awful. I didn't even call her back. I just left, walked down the street to her house. Fuck this shit. Finally, the kitchen again. It's a Saturday evening, and previously mentioned best friend was over at my place. My mom was on a date. It's probably important to mention my dad had died in 2007. It's around 7 or 8 p.m, and we're making snacks when we hear my mom's car pull up. Keep in mind, we've been hanging out in the kitchen for at least 20 minutes, and we had slightly tan tile. We go to meet them at the door. We're all heading back into the kitchen, my best friend and I highly anticipating the leftovers we're about to steal. Upon entering the kitchen, we all notice spots of blood on the floor. 20 or so nickel-sized spots of blood sporadically on the ground, all contained around the general area in front of the stove. My mom, being a mom, says, "Check your feet, it looks like one of you's bleeding." My friend was still in her socks, no blood. I checked my feet, perfectly unbothered. My mom looks for the cat. It's asleep on the couch, probably hadn't moved in hours. We couldn't find the source. We even looked up at the ceiling just in case. My mom's boyfriend wiped some up on a paper towel and sniffed it. "This is definitely blood," he said. Mom just cleaned it up. She even made some remark about how we were probably just trying to scare them. To this day, my friend brings it up like, "Yo, you remember that time there was blood all over your kitchen? Like, seriously, what the fuck was that? Your house was haunted, dude." On top of these things, I just felt awful. I was already depressed. I started having terrible, vivid nightmares almost every night. I now know I have a sleep disorder, and I think these were the first instances of it developing, but that's kind of irrelevant here. I no longer slept in my bed. I created a sort of a safe haven in my closet. After everyone went to bed for the night, I was always on edge. Another night of me snuggled up in my closet, I was listening to my radio, and time somehow escaped me. The radio did its thing, and I was done. I felt terrorized, targeted, and afraid. I just started crying. I hated it. Whatever it was, I just absolutely despised it. I begged it to stop. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "Stop, stop, stop. Please stop, for fuck's sake. Leave me alone, please." And it did. 3:32, I'll never forget. Radio went back to singing clearly. If anything strange happened after that, I didn't bother noticing. A while later, when my mum was in her messier stage of grieving and distracting herself with dating and work failed, she was drinking herself to death on the couch again and brought up the blood in the kitchen to me. "You remember when we saw all that blood in the kitchen? You know what that reminded me of? Your dad. When he was almost gone and the diabetes was taking him, his feet would split and bleed, and I'd have to clean up all the little spots of blood he'd leave behind. Oh, what a terrible time for us." When I was a kid, about 6 or 7 years old, I experienced some kind of entity while with my best friend. Based on what I now know, as an adult, I'm pretty sure it was a demon. My first experience with it was when I went to my friend's house for a playdate. When I got to her house, I went to her bedroom to look for her. The light in the room was off, but the one in the closet was on. So I looked there, and that's where she was. She was sitting on the ground, talking as though she was playing pretend. I asked her what she was playing, to which she responded that she wasn't playing at all, but rather talking to another person in the closet. I remember she had a Barbie poster in her closet, so I asked her if that's who she was pretending to talk to. She got kind of annoyed and said no again, then got up and walked out of the closet, turned around and asked me why I was in there. It was like she didn't know any of what had just happened. This was strange behaviour by her because she was usually extremely sweet and more thoughtful and caring than the average kid her age. She wasn't one to lie or try to hurt others' feelings. The next time we encountered something was when we were in her playroom. There was a bunk bed in there, and we would make a fort by hanging a blanket around the bottom bunk. We'd also turn the lights off to create an atmosphere for our game of dolls or whatever we were playing. The door of the room was closed, not locked. We were sitting there playing, and I happened to look up and see the shadow of a person move between the crack of the hung blanket behind my friend. I thought her mom had come into the room to talk to us. I told my friend, and she got this scared look on her face and asked me to turn on the light. So I got up to turn it on and noticed her mom wasn't in the room like I thought. My kid brain didn't think of ghosts, but also didn't think anything of it at all. I flicked on the light as my friend watched from our fort. As soon as I did, the doorknob next to me started turning back and forth, completely one way and then the other. And it was turning quickly and loudly, like someone was playing with it. If they wanted to push it open, they could. The door was unlocked after all. I remember waiting there for a minute, watching it in confusion, and wondering if maybe her mom wanted to do this instead of knocking on the door for permission to come in. So I grabbed the knob while it was still going and pulled it open. Of course, I'm sure you can gather that no one was on the other side. I went to the hall closet nearby to see if someone had hidden in there. Maybe one of my friend's siblings. My friend ran out of the room while I did that and down the L-shaped hallway to her mom. I went after her and listened to her explain to her mom what happened, and I added that it was true and she wasn't pretending. Her mom chalked it up to us being kids and making it up. We also checked, and neither of her siblings were home that day. This was the last experience I vividly remember, but not the end of the story. A couple of years after it happened, my family moved away and I lost touch with my friend. We never talked about the incident, half because she didn't want to, and half because other things took precedence in my kid brain, I guess. Fast forward about 17 years later. My friend and I are adults now, and she moved out to the town I live in. We agreed to meet and catch up. I'm pretty forward, so I didn't wait long to ask her about the things that happened. Through the years, I realized more and more how wild the experience was, and told friends and family about it. I also looked up things like the doorknob moving to see if there was an explanation. I never found one. Anyways, my friend answered my question with a simple, "Yeah, I remember that. I was actually going to bring it up, because there was a part of it you didn't know, but I wasn't sure if you'd be too scared to hear it." I insisted I was fine. She told me that when we'd have a sleepover at her house, she woke up in the middle of the night every time and saw a shadowy woman with deep red eyes and something on her head, either a hat or a large bun hairstyle. She never ran to get her parents or screamed, and she still doesn't know why. She says she just put the blanket over her head and tried to fall back to sleep. She said that when I moved away, the lady stopped showing up. When her brother moved out to go to college, she took over his room in the basement. She uncovered a Ouija board in his closet while clearing out his old things, so she suspects this is what caused the activity. I think she was worried the lady had attached to me and followed me out of the state, but I never had an experience as intense as that ever again. I sometimes experienced waking up in the middle of the night and being touched or seeing shadows. Not sleep paralysis, because I could still move during these times, but definitely something I chalked up to me being half asleep and possibly still dreaming a little. I'm a preschool teacher, and kids are weird, and we all know they're in tune with the paranormal, right? So this was my first year working in a preschool as an assistant teacher. That part doesn't really matter, to be honest. So there's this one little girl that just started out. She's 3 years old. She doesn't get along with the other kids as well, but she talks to me a lot. She goes on and on about this other kid, presumably a sibling or something. She talks about how they spend time together, play games and go to the park. I'm like, wow, what a cute sibling relationship. The name of this other kid is obviously a real name, and something a 3-year-old wouldn't come up with. So one day, my dad picks up, and I'm making small talk. I say, "When am I going to meet your sibling? Student talks about her all the time." Dad gets quiet like he knows, but wants to pretend like he doesn't, and then he's like, "Who?" And I say, "Oh, I thought she had a sibling." "She talks about her and all the fun stuff they do all the time." And he's like, "No, she doesn't have siblings." So then he doesn't say anything else and it's awkward, and he leaves with his kid quickly. The next day, I'm all curious, so I ask the kid while she's doing an art project, and I'm like, "So who is this friend?" And she dead-ass stops what she's doing, goes blank-faced, looks at me with the most dead eyes I've seen a 3-year-old give me, and says, "She's the girl who watches me sleep through my window at night." Bro, when I tell you I shit my pants. I asked her to draw a picture. I don't know if you know this, but 3-year-olds are ass at drawing pictures. So it was just a circle person with stick legs and arms and a triangle bow on her head. That wasn't all. I actually babysat this kid a few times. Her bedroom was on the second floor of their house. There wasn't a tree there for anyone to climb up or anything. And I asked her if so-and-so still watched her sleep, and she was like, "No. Mommy and Daddy went to a church, and she stopped coming over to play with me." During COVID, The preschool where I worked stayed open, but it was a small place with only 2 classrooms, and a lot of kids didn't come at that time. It ended up being me and one kid a lot of the days. So one evening, we're sitting on the floor playing, and I say something to her with the doll I have or whatever, and the kid doesn't answer. I look up at her, and she's not looking at me, or at the dolls at all. She's looking over my shoulder, just blank-faced. My first instinct was to just say, H, her name. She didn't respond right away. There was a little spot of silence, but when she did, she looked me in the eye and said, "Your mommy is hugging you right now and wants to tell you that she misses you." My first thought upon hearing that was to check on my mom because I was terrified. So I texted her asking if she was okay. I got a response right away and so I was like, okay, whatever, and tried not to think about it again. We keep playing and a few minutes pass and then the kid stops and says, "Miss Y, what does your mommy look like?" I reminded her that she's seen my mom before when she picked me up one day because my car wasn't working. She goes, "Oh, I have seen your mommy. That wasn't your mommy then." I asked her who it was. She said she didn't know. I really didn't want to ask anymore because sometimes I worry that the kids will tell their parents our conversations. And then the parents will think I'm a crazy ghost enthusiast who's teaching their kids scary shit. Also, this kid never said anything like this before or after. It was super random for her. Honestly, when this one happened, I think the kid was just as freaked the fuck out as me. Hopefully, he forgets this as an adult so it doesn't traumatize him. Anyways, I worked at a church preschool. This place was 70 years old. So one day, my director comes to me and she's like, "One of the kids I used to teach passed away, and the funeral is being held in our church building next week. So I'm not going to be around that day." So about a week later, she does a thing. The day after the funeral, I'm chilling with the kiddos, sitting on the carpet, and one of them asks me, "Miss Y, when is that new kid going to start coming here?" And I was like, new kid? We hadn't had any families tour the building for a while. So I asked him, and he said he saw a little boy walking around yesterday, looking in the doorways and watching the kids play. He thought it was some kid on a tour. I was like, "No one new came yesterday, buddy." And he just said, "Oh," and looked freaked out. A child with sense for once. And if I hadn't been nervous before, this kid's face made me feel it. I don't know exactly what he saw, but it seemed like it might have been something a little more than just seeing a new kid playing in the doorways. Anyways, the day continues as usual. I stayed late that night because the cleaners couldn't come, so I did it instead. So I'm doing my thing, just finishing cleaning, turning off the lights, when I hear the distinct sound of a child talking. And my stomach drops because my first thought is, holy shit, did I miscount and lose a kid today? So I call out, "Hey, who's here?" And it goes quiet. Now it's a little spooky. So I think, okay, maybe I imagined it or heard someone outside. Mind you, it's dark and cold outside because it's winter, and it's not like we have some casual visitors just walking by this late with their kids. But we make up whatever narratives to help sleep at night, you know? So I continue doing my things, getting closer to the church building that's connected to the preschool, and I hear it again. Louder. Little kid chit-chattering away, and it's definitely from inside the dark church building where all the lights are off. And I say my fucking prayers because I know I have to check and make sure I didn't forget a kid, because I just have to. So I walk over there, my butt is so clenched, and the church is looking scary as hell. The talking stops and I flip on the lights, check every little corner and room like a madman, and buck it out. I'm not religious, but I was thanking the Lord for that being the end of it, because if I had had the displeasure of actually seeing something, I would have simply passed away. I feel like floating. The best way to describe it is like being under the water and somehow still connected to my body. I don't see myself in bed. It's just a feeling, and I know it's not a dream. It was scary at first, but it actually started to feel relaxing now. First time that this happened, it didn't last long because I panicked and woke up. I thought it was a dream back then, but it keeps happening and it's evolving. Now, besides this floating feeling, I also feel like I'm being dragged. I feel like something is dragging me. It's hard to describe. I can feel the pressure as if my body is in contact with the surface while dragged. And then at one point, I feel like I'm being absorbed. Last week, something a little bit different happened. I remember thinking, okay, seems like I'm floating again. Once more, I feel like I'm floating, feeling the pressure, just like always. But this time, it's like I'm trapped in some sort of circuit where the starting point is my own body. Everything is white. There are no walls, just a white emptiness. After a while, I noticed a bed. It's a small bed. It's all white and there's an old man lying down. First time I noticed him, it gives me the vibe that he's sleeping. I just look at him and keep being dragged around. Another round, and I'm back at the same spot. I somehow stopped. The old man is sitting now, and I ask him what he's doing there. He says that he cannot tell me. I ask who he is. He said that he can't tell me. It's like we're having a conversation without talking. We can somehow communicate, but no word is exchanged. He starts to get out of bed, and I get really scared. He didn't seem to want to attack me or anything like that, but his appearance was scary. I cannot remember completely, but he was mostly bald and had some long white strands of hair on the back of his head. I kind of woke up after that. I told my husband, and he doesn't believe me. He thinks that I'm dreaming, but I know that I am not. Has anyone experienced something like this before? I'm not even sure if it's called an out-of-body experience. I googled it, and out-of-the-body experience is more associated with near-death experiences, which is not the case. But I don't know how to describe what is happening to me.